This material is made available to you by or on behalf of the University of Melbourne under Section 113P of the Copyright Act 1968. It may be subject to copyright. For more information, visit the University Copyright website.
Okay. Welcome back. We need to continue this discussion around barriers to implementing strategy. So far, we've really only covered off on the vision barrier, and that's the most complicated one. So we've covered some pretty good ground there. Let's talk then about the other couple of issues. Firstly, the people barrier. This is an aggregate of barriers that sums up to the fact that only about 25% or so of managers have incentives or are recognised and rewarded according to the strategy. Incentives in underperforming organisations tend to be short-term and not necessarily long-term, and strategy by definition tends to be a long-term change activity. So the incentives tend to be more about the short-term activities, sort of, why we didn't make the numbers last week, why we're underperforming in the budget, why did that machine break down. And so if we measure short-term, then we get short-term behaviour. We have a sort of saying in the management language that says, what gets measured gets done. What gets measured gets done. In other words, if you measure short-term measures, then we'll get short-term behaviour and short-term results. By way of example, if I were to tell you in this subject that your assessment criteria are not going to be measured, what behaviour would I get? In other words, no assessment, coming here for a learning experience, how am I going to measure you? Maybe we don't need to measure it. I'll leave that for you to think about as an example of what gets measured gets done. So the fact that there's more weighting on something, or the syndicate assignment counts more than such and such, tends to reinforce, and you would expect therefore the more effort I put into these, the better I will perform. And so importantly, the measures need to be aligned to a strategy and to the short term. The third one is really an important one too. If I'm giving the impression that strategy is irrelevant or that formulation is irrelevant, that is not my intent. This suggests that people in the executive ranks don't really spend too much time thinking and planning and redefining a strategy. They tend to be focusing on being much more sort of reactive to problems rather than proactive to the future changes in the environment, changes in strategy that needs to take account of these. And very often they're so busy focusing on problem solving and short-term results that strategy is really only visited occasionally. And as we have seen in the winning wheel model, we try to ensure some fuzziness in strategy. So by definition, it's not locked in, but deliberately kept open for opportunities that might arise. And we have this this idea in the management area that says, if people are so busy because they're accounting for all their short-term results, they're forever firefighting, putting out problems, and not getting to the root causes of problems. In other words, a continuous revisiting the same problem. Oh yes, this problem happened, we fixed it, but it wasn't a permanent fix. We need to explore ways to get into the really deep, significant causes of problems that we encounter. There is an acronym that we use to get to root causes, which is ask why. Why did this occur? Why did this occur? Why did this occur? Why did this occur? Before you ask how. 4 Ys, 1 H. 4 Ws, 1 H. Just remember that. Because very often we jump in with solutions to problems that are not only going to not fix the problem, but they're going to create others. So the problem keeps coming back and back and back again to haunt us. Let me maybe explore that in a little bit more detail. Root cause analysis it's called. Root cause analysis. I was doing some work recently in a small metals fabrication factory here in Melbourne, in which they had introduced a major new piece of technology, a laser cutting, computer controlled metal cutting machine. And it was also running with a lathe, metal turning, a lathe machine. And I visited there mainly to look at and assist with the implementation of this laser cutting computer controlled piece of equipment. But next to it was this machine, which was an integral part of the operations, important to make the product, and the machine wasn't working. No big deal, there's probably a good reason for it. But when I went back again and the same machine wasn't working, I said, the machine isn't working, is there an issue? And the answer I got from the owner of the business was, yeah, we've got a problem with that machine. He said, the motor on the lathe, you know what a lathe is? It turns metal, spins it around, you machine it, cut off metal to make a shaft or a pulley or something. He said, yeah, the motor burnt out. Machine can't be used. What are you doing about it? What do you do in those circumstances? He said, well, we've actually ordered a new motor from the machine manufacturer in Germany, of all places, and we are waiting on this new motor to arrive. It's being air freighted out and so on. Oh, okay. So that's the answer. Well, yeah, that's how we do things here. I said, why did the motor fail? Has anyone asked that question? Why did the motor fail? Well, that's a silly question, was the response. The motor overheated. And the windings melted. The motor stopped, burnt out. Oh, why did the wiring, why did the windings overheat to a point where they melted? Well, they weren't adequately cooled. That seems to be a logical answer. There wasn't coolant getting there. Wow. Question, why was there no coolant getting to the motor? Well, we're not sure. Maybe the fluid was blocked, so it couldn't get, because it was working perfectly well when we got the machine. Oh, was the response. Why was the fluid line blocked? We're now down to, I think, 4 Ys. Oh, there must have been a blockage somewhere in the fluid line that was supposed to deliver coolant to the motor, so it didn't overheat and stop. Oh, where and why is the line blocked? So you go and look at this machine, and there in the fluid line, where coolant was supposed to flow to the machine, were pieces of metal. It's a metal machining lathe. and little pieces of metal come off it and sit in the fluid, in the channel, and block the fluid, the cooling fluid. Wow, we're now at a point, so how do we fix that problem? Well, we make sure that the fluid line is regularly cleaned and all that machining fluid is eliminated from the fluid line. Problem solved. That problem did not come back again, would not come back again by a simple maintenance step. The machine wasn't designed to fail, but it did. And by going through this root cause issue, understanding that, the problem was eliminated. And if we're serious about removing the white space, as we talked about, you better get serious about how to eliminate these problems so they don't come back again. However, as we've just said, the senior executives spend too much time not spending time on the root cause analysis, but simply explaining away the problems they have and never eliminating those. The final one that I just mentioned briefly is what we call the resource barrier. A subtle one, but very significant, a resource barrier. 60% of these organisations do not link budgets to strategy. In other words, strategy is typically developed by one group of people, and yes, there might be a finance person in the team, but people who then set about to create the budget are in another room, quite separate from those, and they don't talk to one another. So the strategy people formulate strategy in one group, the budgeting people, the finance people develop a budget in another group. The budget is typically and very often based on last year's performance or the last period of performance, and we need to up it or change it or fiddle with it a bit. But it's based on historical performance. And a strategy, if it's any good, and if it involves a change, as a strategy normally does, then we better start making sure that the change that we're about to embark on is adequately resourced. We can't expect that a new strategy or a new idea can be simply handed over to the operational people or cascaded down and expected that they can do what they're being asked to do if we haven't adequately budgeted people, time, machines, energy, etc. to do that. So it's almost like, here is the new strategy, isn't it exciting? And we want you to implement it, and people are going to say in the operational area, hang on a minute, do you think we're sitting around on our backsides and we've got the capacity, the resources and the skills to simply implement these new ideas? If you want us to do it and we agree with doing it, and it's an important development, then we must have the appropriate resources allocated to us so that we can implement that idea. Unfortunately, in the majority of cases, that simple discipline does not apply. The way some people get around this problem of budgets in organisations is to actually have two budgets. One, for those of you that have experienced it, is hard enough, but two budgets. One budget for business as usual, because we're going to do the same business, the same stuff, and another budget for change. So that change requires extra resources on top of that strategy if it's going to be successfully implemented. So the two budget model is difficult, but it will virtually guarantee to eliminate much of that resource barrier because it's been planned, a budget's been created, and we know exactly what's involved in implementing the strategy. So the two budget model. And another interesting question that can be asked is, what can we stop doing? Not what will we do that's extra, But if we're going to change, or if we decide to change the strategy, then that implies that, and the question has to be asked, so what are we going to stop doing to implement this new strategic direction? Very often that's not clearly asked and not defined. If we say this is very good, it's appropriate, then if we say, and we're going to stop doing this, then guess what happens? We free up resources. People are clear about the fact that we're not going to do this into the future because this new strategy is better, so we'll stop doing that to free up resources to implement our ideas in a strategic sense. So here we have the barriers, some of the 4 important barriers to executing strategy. Let's just continue on, if I may, a little bit about this topic of strategy and execution. Again, when we talked about the language of management, we talked about the dialogue and the way we communicate. You know, and you will encounter this when you start working on some of your assignments. The management literature documentation is riddled and will continually be changed to reflect new management thinking, new ideas about how to be able to capitalise on the intellectual knowledge that's flowing in from all sorts of sources. And you know, inevitably, these different ideas are encapsulated in what we call fads. Fads, you know, a fad is a fashion statement. A fad is something that is a flavour of the month. It's something that everyone's talking about. So if everyone's talking about it, maybe we should do it because it's the way of the future, isn't it? It's an exciting new idea. So let's embark on that. So fads, and we also call these, guess what? We call these 3-letter acronyms. In this case, 3-letter acronyms itself has a 3-letter acronym, TLAs. And if we're talking to people in the management space, they'll say, yeah, we've got a lot of TLAs. What's a TLA? Please define that. It's a 3-letter acronym. But we don't use the words, we use the short abbreviation. And I think in our introductory session, you know, we talked about the language that you would use in your engineering discipline, which inevitably are riddled with all these different 3-letter acronyms that you understand, but when you talk to me, I won't understand because I don't know everything about everything. You know a lot about your disciplines, you use your own language, but talk to me in a way that makes sense to me if I'm listening to you. Don't simply flood me with all these different acronyms that are more confusing than they are clear. And it's the responsibility of the communicator to explain these ideas clearly and concisely into a language that the receiver can fully understand. Now I've just put a few up here. I don't expect you for a moment to understand what all of these mean. That's the mystery of fads. That's the reality. You probably have heard of a few of them. We've already mentioned briefly BPR, Business Process Re-engineering, in our section under Adapt Rapidly on the winning wheel. We also talked about TQM, Total Quality Management, and we've talked briefly about the 3 domains of benchmarking. It's not a 3-letter acronym, it's just a word, but I'll leave it up there as an example of a fad, because you know what is benchmarking? And we just said earlier there are actually 3 different definitions you can use. So it's a big word that's interpreted differently by different people. Here's a whole lot of other ones. ERP, you'll hear Enterprise Resources Planning, computer-based scheduling and resource allocation, flexible manufacturing systems, the idea of how can we build technologies that are able to be changed quickly from making one product to the next. They need to be highly flexible to accommodate a variety of products coming through them. QFD, quality function deployment, that's a good one. What on earth does that really mean? CRM, customer relationship management, and so it goes on. VAM, value adding management, NOT, moments of truth, SPC, baked beans, statistical process control. This is the three-letter acronym, the alphabet soup. I'm being taped. Yes, I'm aware of that. Thank you. So the three-letter acronyms create confusion. They create a language that goes even something like this, you know, talk to me about how you manage your operations. And an operations manager might say something like, well, we started with JIT, but it didn't account for our ERP system. We had to look at MOTs and introduce a bit of VAM. TQM really didn't work, so we resorted to BPR because it's much more step change in significance. And we're really now looking at FMS because we're really past the BPR TQM phase, and we're now looking at CRM as the next driver of our performance. Hallelujah. What on earth did that mean? But when you talk to people who know or claim to know, that's the language you get. And so there's almost a sort of an arrogance. Oh, you haven't heard of that? Oh, I went to a conference last week and this is what everyone's talking about. And I think I know what it is, so we're going to try it. And it's a very confusing thing. This creates organisational burnout. Burnout. Three-letter acronyms. Because who are we trying to communicate all this to? Well, it's not to boost your own ego that you know something as much as everyone else at a senior level. You're trying to communicate these concepts to people at the front line. Why? Because they work in the processes. They are part of an important part of the value-adding conversion process from inputs to outputs, and we better learn to decouple and not create organisational burnout. You know, like we tried JOT last week, it didn't work, so we're going to shift to TQM, and if that doesn't work, we're arming up and getting trained in VPR. Heavens above, how do you expect anything to be adopted and successfully implemented if we keep changing in that fashion? So, you know, sometimes, I was reading an article the other day. I just came across this in McKinsey and Company. Some of you may have already started to access McKinsey stuff on your syndicate assignment. And the title is The Next Acronym You Need to Know About. And the acronym that was put up in the title was RPA. 3 letters. You know, what does that mean? It's the latest fad, RPA. What? And it took me a little while to understand what on earth they were talking about. And it was an acronym for Robotic Process Automation. Robotic Process Automation. Another acronym I could put up there. It just adds to this confusion and challenge we have in remaining current here. Another way to perhaps introduce a somewhat more humorous dimension to this message about burnout 3-letter acronyms is, well, it's probably very important as we face this brave new future. If you were to make yourself a bowl of alphabet soup, you know alphabet soup? You get a packet of pasta and it's got all the little letters of the alphabet in it, and you make up your soup by putting a cup full of pasta shaped like the letters of the alphabet. And as you're stirring your pasta and you pick up a spoonful of pasta, reduce those 3 those letters of pasta down to 3 or 4. Take them out and put them on the table. If it's 3 letters and you put them in any order, you can probably make up a new idea out of the 3 letters. Maybe it's something like a C came out, maybe a letter P came out, but maybe an I came out. Wow, what does that mean? Wow, continuous productivity improvement. I've made up a new idea out of a management fact. That's an important message that we need to avoid. Part of this subject, and part of my part, is not to go into those in any detail at this point, but to try and emphasise the fact that behind all of these management concepts in the world of engineering management, maybe there's a big picture. Maybe there's a common message that lies behind these different 3-letter acronyms. And arguably, but consistently, it comes back to a definition of what do we mean by an operational strategy. What is the definition of this operational strategy? And behind each of these acronyms is this common theme. And it's a very important definition made up of 3 concepts. The first is that it is about a strategy of continuous improvement. Yeah? Now, continuous improvement, we've talked about that previously in session 1 and 2. The continuous improvement is a basic belief that we can always do a little bit better tomorrow than what we have done today. We can improve by a few percentage points or even more. And continuous improvement, if we go back to this model that we talked about a moment ago, to be able to do what I've said here, continuously improving from a vertical to horizontal mindset, don't think that's easy to do, but it requires an incremental approach. It requires a bit by bit approach. It requires a continuous improvement approach. As we'll see later, if we want to shrink and reduce this core process, then it requires incrementalism. Our shoemaking company had incremental activity from 3 months to 3 days, but it took 2.5 years to do it. So this fundamental belief in the notion of continuous improvement is important. And how are we going to improve? How are we going to improve? Through the progressive identification and elimination, finding and getting rid of all non-value adding and non-service adding wastes. Non-value adding and non-service adding waste. Think back to the pyramid structure, vertical to horizontal, white space, that every organisation is riddled currently with wastes. Now that's a bold statement, and I accept that some business models are a little different. If you're just making one product, or if you're making an incentive on one piece of technology, that may not apply to the same degree, but it will still nevertheless be valid. That a starting point about continuous improvement will be an acceptance of the notion that waste exists, and we can define this as non-value adding or non-service adding, as distinct from value adding. A value adding activity is one that adds value as far as the customer is concerned. A non-value adding activity adds cost or waste and complexity as far as the organisation is concerned. So you need to appreciate that significant comment. And in our simulation, waste identification and elimination is important. So we then need to appreciate that the third dimension is how do we find and eliminate these non-value adding activities and non-service adding wastes? Well, we're going to ask the people. We're going to involve the frontline operators. We're going to accept that the people here working in the process know more about that process than people working on the process, in the process, on the process. An important distinction. So, to find and eliminate these wastes, we're going to involve the people in the front line to help us identify and eliminate the waste. Now, irrespective of which FAD, which acronym you choose to use, behind it is this overarching message. And that's where I want you to really home in on. Don't get decoupled from this, don't get lost in the fog. Make sure that you really understand this. And you really have to commit to these three dimensions: continuous improvement, waste identification, elimination, and creative involvement of people. The source of ideas, the source of creativity, the source of understanding these wastes and eliminating comes from the 6 inches that sits between here. It's the brain power of the thinking process. Machines can't do that. Technology can't do that. We have to tap into that creativity of our people in order for us to identify those. And technology and information then becomes an enabler by all means. But the source of creativity, by definition, comes back to the creativity of our people. I don't know of one machine that's capable of improving itself without human intervention. That may change in the future, but that remains to be seen. So we now have something to hang onto in terms of the operational strategy. One final point about the notion of effective execution, and this comes from our winning organisations, and our articles are knowing this that helps you get to this point. So please refer to those. And here is a checklist of a few points that make sure that organisations should use, many do use, to make sure they're implementing effective strategies. The first is to clearly define the core business process. Here is a core business process. It's unique to the organisation, and it's generally only one process, or maybe two. The core business process runs through the structure and may well require support processes. And understanding and grappling with this notion is, what is the process that really drives our business, and identifying that as the core business process. What I'm saying here is, yes, other parts of the organisation have processes, but we want to really make sure we've thought about the core and document it, flowchart it, draw it, explain it to me, put it on a board, the core business process. There may well be, and of course there are, feeder processes that are needed to support the core business process. For example, IT processes. We're not in the IT business, but we do need an IT process to support the core business. So what is that process? In a similar fashion, we might have another activity that is required to support these different activities, which might be something like machine maintenance. In other words, here's our core process, but we're not in the business of maintaining machines, we're in the business of providing product and services, but we better make sure we've got support processes. That ensure that this core business process is effective and efficient. Okay? So understanding that model and defining it's important. A couple of these other points are documented in the article on LMS in some detail, but just to cover on a few of these. There's a difference between giving people responsibility and giving people responsibility and accountability. And accountability comes from performance management and having measures of performance against which people will be assessed. Having good control systems. Control system, a bit like what you're expert in the engineering space, is really where we have a closed loop system so that if we are doing something deep in the organisation, management gets feedback from that area so that they can control and adjust personnel, manpower, people power, technology and funds to make adaptive and corrective action to what's happening at the frontline operator level. We've talked about measuring performance before, and that usually involves setting targets and setting some what we call key performance indicators, KPIs, there's another acronym for you, and having those in place to accurately measure and assess performance. This is an interesting one, handling mistakes positively. If we are on a pathway of continuous improvement, then we understand and accept that there will be a little bit of risk. There will be some things that are tried. There are activities that we experiment with. That's the spirit of continuous improvement. And we drew this in our session a couple of weeks back by saying, this was this incremental pathway. Improvement over time. Time here and improvement. So here things were looking good, but then suddenly improvement fell off. Well, we learned from those mistakes. We took corrective action and management encouraged that and said, okay, a mistake was made, it's not dramatic. It hasn't resulted in our business going out of business, but we made a mistake. It didn't generate the result we were looking for. What are the lessons to learn from that? And how can we ensure that we learn from those and execute and implement ideas that eliminate that from happening again? Just don't make the same mistake twice. That implies we haven't learned from it. So they're really seen as more not problems or mistakes, but as opportunities to learn and improve. And this final one is a little bit convoluted and difficult, but I'll try and explain it fairly simply, is that an organisation is made up of different entities, each being measured in a different way according to their cost and their revenue and their profitability. And very often in the accounting profession, we aggregate all these different results from the different entities into an overall budget and financial result. And worse than that, it then implies that I could be working in a part of the business where I have been extremely successful, where I have been exceeded all my targets, I've exceeded the budget, I've exceeded the cost reduction targets, I've made the company a lot of money, but that's never recognised because it's amortised and spread over the whole organisation. So in spite of my department's success, I feel I'm being disadvantaged in the overall context sense, which is a demotivator. So we want to deliberately create an accounting system, we call it activity-based costing, where each entity has a profit and loss, a budget, an income outcome component, and we can flush out the areas that are high performing, those that aren't as high performing, look at opportunities to transfer ideas from one group to another, benchmarking, but ensure that we don't demotivate some success in the organisation and let the bad performing parts get elevated by high performers in others. We call that cross-subsidisation. So these are factors now a bit more relevant to our winning wheel model. All right, let's continue. We just had a little 1 minute break here, so Dorito's done a marvellous job, I'm sure, stitching this all together. Seamless, horizontal, patchwork quilt. I hope it's coming through well for you. And finally, we know what the barriers are, we know the vertical, the horizontal transition, we know about that. We know about delivering results in winning organisations. Let me try and lift this to an even higher level for you and say, again, that the notion is firstly important about leadership in the area of strategy execution. And leadership in itself is a topic in its own right. I am not in a position to elaborate on that. It's such a big topic. You know, if you were to Google the different sorts of leadership that exist in the management literature, you'd probably find, in fact, I did it just the other day, and there's about 27 different words you can put in front of the word leadership, and you will find literature and a documented valid form of leadership. Transformational leadership, intelligent leadership, emotional leadership, egalitarian leadership, and so it goes on and on and on. Importantly, irrespective of the leadership style, is that it remain focused. In other words, what we have to say is try and communicate the significant parts, the major parts, and we need to do what we call management by walkabout. We need to live and communicate actively, not trying to manage from a distance, the importance of what we are trying to achieve, what is our competitive environment, and remain focused on all of those particular activities. Don't spend time trying to communicate the whole strategy for the whole organisation to everybody, but rather focus on the people's role you're communicating with in achieving the critical 80% of the equation, rather than trying to convince everybody about the 20% that others need to contribute. So, focused leadership, a pretty logical comment. If I didn't have that up there, it would be quite remiss. Irrespective of the leadership style, keep repeating, keep communicating the theme and the strategy we're trying to implement. The second one is interesting, to me anyway. It's called visible performance management systems. Now, what that means is essentially, if we are measuring performance in the organisation and we have managed to create a measurement system deep in the organisation that is, back to our pyramid model, we have measures down here, then an important aspect of effective execution is to make the measurement system visible. Put it in the workplace. If you were to go to a GE call centre, there's one down here in Richmond, global, and I spent a bit of time down there not so long ago, and one thing impressed me, and that was that the place was alive. It was a living, real-time operation. You know, this is a call centre. It's supposed to be the dullest, most uninteresting place anyone would want to work or build a career. However, there were charts, flashing lights, colour, balloons, everything happening at the workplace, real-time management, people moving from one operation to the other because of demand, and how they were being measured was charted and visible in the workplace. If the measurement system is invisible, buried on the laptop of the manager, it's not near as effective. If we want to empower and involve people, then make all this visible. Charts, histograms, run charts, check sheets, defect calculation, all sorts of aspects, but make it work for you by having it visible. That creates a culture of openness and transparency, and people are more willing to put their ideas forward. The other dimension is an important one. We're going to build a lot on process management techniques in a couple of sessions. Project management is the other mystery at this point. And let me just give you, I'll do this in another section. Let me, for example, ask you, many of you have studied project management, but in the execution space, project management is a highly underutilised management discipline. Executing strategy can be viewed as a project. It meets the definition. So, do we know what a work breakdown structure is? Do you know what a Gantt chart is? Do you know how to do critical path analysis? Do you know how to do risk analysis? Do you know how to work out budgets and how to structure a project using these techniques? That's a goldmine of opportunity for us if we care to commit to understanding a bit about project management. So important management discipline that assists with the implementation of strategy. And the final driver, I can't help but get back to one important element in the winning wheel model, having the right people. If you have not got the right people, not the best people often start their careers in a function. We've got the best marketer, the best finance man, the best innovator, the best production manager, but the horizontal world demands linkage, connectivity, teamwork, participation, respect for the individual, all of those wonderful attributes that build teams of people because they're the right people. Very often the best person is not the right person. Your challenge is, can you be both? Can you be the best person and the right person? If so, you're destined for a great career. All right, that finishes this little part of the session. I now would like to build on this issue around the structures, execution and measurement. We've sort of laid the groundwork a bit for that, haven't we, in terms of the preamble that's occurred in this particular session. So, structures, execution and performance measurement. And what we're going to do in this session will be to take a look at a video in due course. Not in this session, but in the next one, because we're tracking reasonably well through this one. we're going to look at the importance of measurement, how to get the right measures. Is there a single measure? Is there some measure that we can use that will demystify all of the complexity in the organisation and drive it in the right direction? Let me preempt that by saying there is not one single macro measure. We might think that maybe the shareholder, person who's put money in, is money king? Is money the most important performance measure? It's an important measure, but is it the most? And is it the one angle, one measurement that we need to have in place? And as a starting point, measurement has transitioned very much from what we call a shareholder model to a more complex model built around stakeholders. Shareholders are, it's obvious, are those people and entity who put money into the business. They invest in the business, they might own the business, the market, the investment funds are about shareholders who have looked for return on equity. That is, I put in $1 million, I expect to get back 100,000 per annum return. My share price, what is it currently valued at, and how much profit is the company making? This is a simplistic model that no longer reflects the real world. Yes, shareholder, no doubt an important stakeholder. And that was the dominant stakeholder, the shareholder, around the 1970s to 80s. But as history has unfolded, there have been major changes, major initiatives that have questioned and demanded that this simple shareholder model be changed to reflect other stakeholders. And I'll just define a stakeholder. A stakeholder is any entity that, if it withdraws its services, we don't have a business. It's a funny definition, but a good definition of a stakeholder. So, does a shareholder fit that definition? Well, of course it does, because if the shareholder or no one wants to put any money in, irrespective of whether you're a for-profit or not-for-profit, you still need money to run it. So the shareholder is a stakeholder. Shortly after this timeline, there was another change. And this was actually arguably precipitated by a book, written by Ralph Nader, a US Senator, who wrote a book called Unsafe at Any Speed. And in this book, he took General Motors to task. He wasn't a senator at the time. He took General Motors to task by saying General Motors is making unsafe motor cars that turn over when they go around a bend and kill people. And this book Suddenly, believe it or not, people said, actually, he's right. And why should we, as customers, accept and put up with that? So, if you can't meet my needs and I'm unhappy with you, I'll go somewhere else or I won't buy your product. So now we have another stakeholder called a customer. Yeah? Is a customer a definition of a stakeholder? Well, if we don't have customers and if they withdraw the service, we don't have a business. So yes, it fits. It was then sometime later, particularly around the 1990s, that we began to appreciate, and this was through the integration of trade union movement and some of the success stories from successful international organisations, that said we actually have another stakeholder in our organisation, which are our employees. This was into the 1990s. Okay, because we better start respecting people as a source of creativity. We better understand their importance in the productivity equation and in sustainable organisational excellence. So we began to recognise and treat people in a different way. No longer were they regarded as simply an asset to be stripped out of the company, but we appreciated that with the right people in our organisation, we're going to be more successful. If the employees withdrew their services, we don't have a business. So they also fit the definition of a stakeholder. So now we've got three. And it was around this time too that we had suppliers, the importance of supplier relationships. This was around the late 90s. Where we better start treating our suppliers with respect and as if they are part of our core business process. If we continue to treat them poorly and we try to beat them unnecessarily in terms of their pricing, we don't want to pay that, we'll go somewhere else, and not working constructively with your suppliers, then if we don't have suppliers and they won't work with us, we don't have a business. So now suppliers also fit the definition. So we now have 4 stakeholders: money, customers, people, and suppliers. Now, in this day and age, there's another one, isn't there? There's another stakeholder. There's another important entity that if it withdrew its services, we don't have a business. And that final stakeholder is the environment. This is sort of post-2000. A recognition of the importance of our organisation in a responsible attitude towards the environment. And the environment not only means the stuff we pump up into the air, but also our contribution to the community and the local community environment we have. So this model that I'm referring to here, where we have to get to, is not just try and measure one thing, but try and identify this family of stakeholders and decide how we might actually start to measure these different activities. And that's what takes us into an interesting dimension about how can we balance and counterbalance these different trade-offs. And this is where we'll look at this video in a future session, which looks at the application of a measurement technique which we call the balanced scorecard. Some of you might find it interesting that that's in itself another 3-letter acronym. just add it to your shopping list. So here we have now, as we said, a more complicated model around how can we now measure money, customers, business processes, which is supplier, and it's called learning and innovation, not just people, but trying to home in on how can we learn and innovate in our organisations through engaging people constructively in the process. This is an important concept, and it's pivotal to this whole notion of a balanced scorecard, is to appreciate that how we measure performance, and remember earlier I said measures bring the two bits of strategy together, formulation and execution, and I've already now mentioned in this model of the horizontal organisation, what gets measured gets done, and we need to make sure that we have connected the senior executive, the middle management and the shop floor or frontline operators in an aligned and consistent measurement system. And therefore we call performance measurement a depth lever, because it gets deep in the organisation. Yes, we're going to have organisational wide measures. They need to be broken down or cascaded down to the next level, which is a process or team level, where we have teams and groups of people working to deliver the organisational level outcomes. But the process and team level is still not sufficient. We have to be able to get down to a deeper level that says, at the individual job performer level, how can we measure you individually? How can we measure you in terms of your performance to the team and your performance then to the organisational level? We call this the cascade, a bit like a waterfall, starting with that and chunking down these measures that we're trying to develop to make sure everyone is aligned and connected deep in the organisation. Sorry?
So you have room for 5 because the class starts at 6. You've got students waiting for
Yeah, all right, just a minute. Okay, so we'll leave it at that point because the next material we're going to talk about this very point of cascading into the organisation, and we will, again, as I said, take a look at this video on some case studies. So today we've got to a good point in the presentation, and in session 5, the video and some more discussion around measurement and strategy execution, before then presentation on some of the more broader aspects of project management. So thank you for that, and we'll catch up with you in the next session. Thank you.